Picture this, a shallow stone basin, half buried in the dirt outside a cluster of round huts.
It's the Levant, roughly 13,000 years ago. Long before pyramids, long before writing, long before anyone's ever heard the word civilization.
Inside that basin, wild barley, soaked in water, sitting in the sun a few days too long.
It smells sour. It smells wrong.
Somebody's about to drink it anyway. And that decision, that one slightly gross decision, might be the reason you're watching this video on a screen right now instead of foraging berries in a forest.
Here's the mystery. For 100 years, historians told you agriculture came first.
Humans got hungry, humans figured out farming, humans settled down, humans made bread. And then, almost as an afterthought, somebody left bread dough out too long and, oops, beer. Neat story. Tidy timeline. Possibly backwards.
Because there's a theory, and it's got actual archaeology behind it, that says humans didn't domesticate wheat to make bread.
They domesticated it to make beer. Bread was the side effect. Let that sit for a second.
The birth of cities. The birth of writing. The birth of civilization, as we love to call it.
Maybe downstream of humans wanting to get a little buzzed on a regular basis. So, how does a species go from foraging wild grass seeds to building sumer?
Foraging, fermenting, brewing, farming, and finally bread. Let's see where the story actually breaks. Rewind further. Before the Natufians, the people who built those round huts, humans had been eating wild cereal grasses for tens of thousands of years. Not farming them, just finding them. Wild barley, wild wheat, wild einkorn, growing in loose stands across the hills of the Fertile Crescent, doing their own thing, completely uncultivated. You'd grab a handful, grind it between two rocks, maybe chew it raw. Grain wasn't glamorous. Big game was the main event. Meat got you through winter. Grain was a side dish that happened to grow itself, scattered across hillsides, at the mercy of rainfall and season. Here's the thing about wild grain, though. Leave it wet, leave it warm, leave it alone for a few days, and it doesn't just spoil. It transforms. Wild yeast, floating around in the air, on the grain itself, everywhere, always, gets to work. Sugars turn into alcohol. Something inedible becomes something interesting. Nobody planned this. There's no eureka moment carved into a cave wall. It's messier than that. It's a species stumbling into chemistry by accident over and over for thousands of years until the accident started looking less like a mistake and more like a pattern worth repeating.
At some point, and archaeologists genuinely argue about exactly when, somebody didn't just tolerate the sour, fizzy, weird-tasting grain water.
Somebody liked it, liked what it did.
The mild high, the social warmth. The way a gathering around that basin felt different than a gathering around plain water.
And here's where it gets very human. Once you like something, you don't wait for it to happen to you. You start trying to make it happen on purpose. That's not a small leap. That's the leap.
The moment a group of foragers start deliberately soaking grain, deliberately waiting, deliberately managing a process they don't fully understand yet, they've crossed from eating what nature gives you into engineering an outcome.
That's basically the first draft of technology.
Excavations at sites like Raqefet Cave in modern-day Israel have turned up stone mortars with residue patterns consistent with malting and fermenting grain, dated to roughly 13,000 years ago.
Before farming, before pottery even. The drive to brew may have shown up before humans had the tools we associate with civilization at all. Quick myth check, because this is where people get it backwards. The old assumption was farming enabled beer. Cultivate grain, get surplus, get bored, get beer. Reality, or at least the version a lot of archaeologists now take seriously, might run the other direction.
Wanting a reliable, repeatable supply of fermentable grain, not bread grain, may have been part of what pushed foragers toward deliberately planting and tending wild cereals in the first place.
Is this proven beyond doubt? No.
The beer before bread hypothesis is still debated.
Some researchers think food and drink motivations evolved together, tangled up, impossible to fully separate.
But
The fact that it's even a live debate, that serious archaeologists take humans farmed for booze seriously, tells you something about how thin the line was between mundane survival and what we now call recreation.
Once you're deliberately planting grain, for beer, for food, for both, you're locked into a whole new lifestyle.
Wild grain doesn't care about your schedule. Domesticated grain does.
It needs tending, protecting, harvesting at exactly the right window.
Wander off for a season and your semi-tame plot goes feral again.
So people stayed, built more permanent structures, started storing surplus grain in pits, in baskets, eventually in the kind of granaries that show up at early agricultural sites across Mesopotamia.
Surplus grain means surplus beer. Surplus beer means bigger, more frequent gatherings.
Bigger gatherings mean more coordination, more shared ritual, more reasons to have leaders and record keepers, and eventually writing.
some of the earliest known written symbols from Sumer aren't poetry or law.
They're ration records, beer rations specifically, paid to workers building temples and canals. The stuff that built the first cities was, quite literally, purchased with beer. Bread needed something beer didn't: reliably strong, fine-ground flour and controlled baking.
That took longer to develop.
Early domesticated grain wasn't great for bread yet. It suited porridge, gruel, and mash for fermenting far better.
The proper risen loaf we picture shows up archaeologically after brewing evidence at several key sites, not before. So if the theory holds even partially, bread, the thing we think of as civilization's most basic food, might be the overachieving younger sibling. Beer got there first. Beer was the beta test.
Step back and look at what actually happened. A species that survived hundreds of thousands of years on meat, roots, and whatever fruit didn't run away. That species reorganized its entire way of living, invented agriculture, built permanent settlements, developed surplus economies, and arguably kick-started written language, possibly chasing a feeling.
A buzz. A few hours of altered consciousness shared around a fire with people they liked. Nobody in Raqefet Cave was thinking about Sumer or writing or you watching this on a phone 13,000 years later. They just wanted to feel a little different together and were willing to work for it. So next time you crack open a beer on a Friday, half watching something on a screen, you're not doing anything new.
You're doing the oldest trick in the human book.
Before bread, before cities, before almost everything we call civilization, there was a basin of sour, fizzy grain water and a handful of people who decided the smell was worth the risk. Turns out getting a little buzz together might be one of the most civilizing things we ever did. What other accidental habit do you want traced back to its weird origin? Drop it in the comments. Might be the next one.